Welcome to The Insurgency with me, Steve Baker. It's the podcast which helps us all get beyond the gossip of Westminster to the factors which really affect all of our lives. We're proud to be brought to you by GlintPay. It's the app which enables you to own, save, send and spend real physical gold just about everywhere that MasterCard is accepted. Joining me, as always, is my co-host. It's Harry Richer, the Director of Fighting for a Free Future, and we have got a real treat for you today. Harry?
Thank you so much, Steve. Today, we're so excited to bring you the think tankers on the insurgency. We have three of the soundest people from Westminster with us today. We have Maxwell Marlow, Westminster's arch Yimby from the ASI. We have Emma Revell from the CPS, who leads on everything Margaret Thatcher. And we have the man who made the Birmingham bin strikes famous, Will Yarwood from the TPA. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, you guys are very, very welcome. Maxwell, Emma, William, absolutely brilliant to have you here. Now, each of your think tanks takes a slightly distinctive approach. William, why don't you tell us, what does the TPA do and what's your latest campaign?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thanks for being here. It's nice to get out of Westminster just for a little bit. A bit of a headache over there, I must say, sometimes. But nevertheless, yeah, we at the TPA, we're a think tank, yes, but we're more of a campaign group, I'd say. So we're very, very focused on getting our research into the media mainly and influencing public opinion that way, but of course using digital platforms like Twitter or X, don't want to get cancelled for that one, or off Twitter that might be, on Facebook and other places like that to get our message out there. And we mainly focus on that, and we focus on a handful of issues at a time. Obviously, being from the TaxPayers Alliance, we focus quite a lot on local government, local councils, local council waste, SEND spending, social care, things like that. But of course, we focus on the wider administrative state as well. We've been focusing on that recently as we've just released a new briefing note. I think it's our third iteration of our growth of the civil service. And folks, it's not great. This is the 9th consecutive year where the civil service headcount has increased. And the worst part of this all is that there has been a 20% increase in the number of people on over £100,000 a year. So I'm sure everyone at home, and I'm sure all of you, feel like you're getting great value for money from your civil servants. But
I'm
yeah,
sure you
that's
said 20% increase then. Really?
Yeah,
20% more people on over 100,000?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Together with their pension entitlements.
Oh, before we go talk about their gold-plated public sector pensions, which are going to bankrupt us, before we talk about their expenses, before we talk about the fact that, lots of them can just, expense things for their work-from-home days. I think we did an investigation at the TPA just a bit recently where we revealed that it was about £1 million had been spent on, those standing desks, which are automated. £1 million of taxpayers' money was spent so that civil servants could work from home using standing desks. So, yep, just another day in the life of me, and I'm very much enjoying it, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I think we've got a flavour of the TPA. Emma, tell us about the CPS. What's the style of the CPS?
So we, most people tend to know as a sort of Margaret Thatcher's think tank. We were founded by Margaret Thatcher and Keith Joseph back in 1974. So we're just recently celebrated our 50th anniversary. We tend to look at straight down the line policy, whether that's, analysing policy announcements that political parties come up with or thinking of our own. We have core areas that, everything you'd expect, tax and the economy being like a very big part of that. But more recently, championing house building has been a really big part of what we focus on as, a key driver of growth, really. And I would say the CPS is sort of niche within the think tank sphere, tends to be looking at policy that is practical, not necessarily right now, although that is important, what is implementable within the current political sphere, but also sort of looking at sort of 5 to 10 years down the line. We do some bigger picture things, pushing the Overton window as far as we can, but the focus tends to be on what's realistic now and in the sort of near future.
You remind me that Rishi published a paper with you on free ports and then became Chancellor and did it.
And implemented free ports, indeed. So,
And I remember that free ports were not very popular with HMRC.
They were not. I don't think they were very popular when he wrote his first report, but I think that was one of the first big things he did when he was elected as a backbencher. So, we're very pleased to boast about that one.
Classic of the genre. So we come to the Adam Smith Institute on the edge of lunacy, I understand.
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes you find ourselves in the lunacy. Our role, really, we're a very small group of what I like to call kind of privateers of policy. And we do try and think outside of the box when it comes to a lot of policy, and we engineer it so that it is on the edge of lunacy, and we then get it to the edge of policy. And it's about really how do you do that is the difficult question, and here's my plug, is that we've actually just revisited Micropolitics. Micropolitics Revisited, which is our handbook really for getting policy done, and in here you find dozens of examples of how we kind of got really quite weird ideas. So everything's from the Citizen Charter. So, but back in the 70s and 80s, if your train was held up, they didn't need to tell you why, or when you would be expected to, when the train would expect to start again, or how long it would take to get to the destination. We pushed that. We put the Citizen Charter Board in place under John Major, and now you can have some pretty decent communications, whether that is in your local hospitals or your transport, or really even bin services, for example. So we engineer things like that, and at the moment we're doing that, but also looking at the growth agenda. It's a new paper we put out, 14 big punchy areas of the economy that we think would make the average Brit £7,500 better off. So
we are coming on to that.
Absolutely.
You gave me a good example of micropolitics applied with privatisation of phones. What was that? What was that?
So obviously during the privatisation agenda under Margaret Thatcher and John Major, most people who worked for British Telecom, which was obviously state-owned, most people who worked there didn't want it to be privatised. And the way we managed to engineer it to be privatised was to basically buy people off. And that is very simple. It's some people call it bribery. We don't. We call it, we call it incentivization and enrichment. So people who were originally really against it, we discounted share buybacks, and slowly people came around to the idea. Actually, I do want to become a millionaire by the age of by the age of 60. So I will vote in favour in order to buy shares in BT. And obviously now it's doing remarkably well. So that's just one small example of many, many others.
Do you know? I remember a story that Conservative MPs, were against the privatisation of the phone system because it was something they could do to help their constituents. When people needed a phone line installed, they could get in touch with their MP and complain, and the MP could get hold of the nationalised industry and bump them up the queue, and people were grateful. Honestly, proper communism. Honestly, unbelievable. So, why do you do it? Maxwell, why do you do it? What was it that personally attracted you to work in the world of think tanks?
So the first book my dad gave me was The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek. So my dad's a software engineer, and he's always been a bit of a libertarian. I mean, at university he had kind of hair down to his waist. He didn't drive a car. He rode on a motorcycle. It was fantastic. It was brilliant. I know someone very similar. But he's always been about that sort of thing, and he really pushed me to get into it and understand that actually critical thinking is really important. So when I trundled off to university, I went to the London School of Economics in London, started going to ASI events, almost had to get a restraining order on me to stop me from coming to the office. I was there all the time, and it was my first internship. Then I worked to the private sector for a bit at a consultancy, and then Liz Truss happened. The fireball over Westminster, over Tufton Street. So ASI did a big reshuffle. I got a phone call, and I was made director of research, and I've loved every moment of it. It's such good fun.
Terrific. And Emma, what drew you to the think tank world?
It was strange, really, because I'm always fascinated. I've worked in think tanks most of the last 9 years. I had a year and a half in what I call a proper job. Yeah. But mostly I've been in think tanks since about 2017. And I meet a lot of interns or sort of young people getting into it. I've been a big fan of the IEA's work or the CPS's work since I was, doing my A-levels or whatever. And I sort of look at these young people and go, how do you know what a think tank is? Because I had no idea. I did a politics undergrad. I didn't know what a think tank was until about 6 months before I graduated. And it was purely because I followed Sam Bowman and I followed Chris Snowden on Twitter. And I just liked what they were saying because I'm instinctively a sort of free market classical liberal. And I thought these guys are saying the sort of things that I like, and through them learnt what a think tank was and the work that the think tanks do, and then thought, okay, well maybe that could be something that I might want to explore. And like I say, most of the last 9 years doing it at the CPS twice and a stint at the IEA as well. So can't get rid of me now at this point.
Yeah, very good. And William, what attracted you to this life of combat and animosity towards the state?
Just pure love of the game, Steve. Absolutely pure, insane love of the game. No, if I'm honest, a lot of this started before I went to university. I think I was the only person in my year at school who was vehemently anti the European Union. Actually, Euroscepticism was my first ever political opinion, which I think is a pretty good opinion to start off with. And obviously, with that, if you're concerned and sceptical of international organisations, you're going to be just as sceptical of the one that you have home, namely the state. I read a decent amount of libertarian political theory, whether it was someone like Hayek, but some more hardline ones like Murray Rothbard. And I'm not fully in that sort of circle anymore, I suppose, in terms of an intellectual way. I've developed in other ways. But I've always been certainly on the right of politics. And when I went to university, unlike a lot of people who just wanted to, get on with their lives and drink lots of booze, which of course I did anyway. But no, never. I still don't now. I decided, you know what, I'm going to throw my lot in and properly get involved in politics. And I joined the Freedom Society at Exeter University, which is where I went to university, which is the student organisation of the Freedom Association. Set up in the 1970s. And I was in that organisation for 4 years. I was president for 2 of those years, and by the end of it, we were having 50-odd people every single week turning up to our events, which was absolutely amazing. And then I moved into London and Westminster. Always knew I wanted to work in politics. Did do a stint as a parliamentary staffer for my shame. So I was a taxpayer-funded stooge, folks, once upon a time. And then once I decided it was time for me to leave, and I felt like I'd hit a ceiling in that job, I saw the TaxPayers Alliance was hiring for a job that was similar to my skill set, tech, digital, things like that. And in comparison to other think tanks, I mean, I've had a lot of interaction with the TPA when I was at university. If anyone knows, TPA has lots of free stuff. We give away, lots of free stuff. TaxPayers Alliance giving out free stuff. Not taxpayer-funded stuff, by the way. just not taxpayer-funded stuff.
Privately funded.
Privately funded, things like booklets, lighters, things like that. And they were always great fun to give out at fresher stalls. So I've sort of known of them for a long time, and I like their work on local government stuff. I like their energy. I liked their, the way they personalised things. They talk about taxpayers. They talk about it being your money.
Yeah.
And when I saw that job, I thought, you know what? I'm just going to have to go for it. And you know what? I've been there 2 years, and I couldn't be happier.
No,
and yes, I get to do a lot of attacking on the way through, which I thoroughly enjoy.
Well, you're all obviously round pegs in round holes. It's absolutely brilliant that you do the work that you do.
Yeah, no, I must say I was one of the 17, 18-year-olds who were a big fan of all of your think tanks, among others. So I was one of those very nerdy young people who absolutely always loved the think tank world. Although I spent most of my time as a parliamentary staffer, so as a stooge in Parliament, taking taxpayer money.
Yeah.
But
I can't even criticise you for that, because I did it too.
It's about 0.1 second of NHS funding there.
Yes,
You don't worry. But I think one of the most interesting things, and we spoke about kind of the Freeport success before, is, and I think it's something that's probably misunderstood across the public as well, is how do think tanks actually influence policy? How do they get policy change? Maybe, Emma, you were using examples of it. Speak us a bit more through how the CPS really tries to influence policy, and particularly with a Labour government at the moment.
And we probably tend to do it in a less direct way, as William said, more of a campaigning organisation, the CPA. That's not sort of the CPS's history. That's not where we are. We do quite a lot of engagement with policymakers directly, and traditionally, those have been on the right. That's not to say that we don't speak to Labour, but when you're founded by Margaret Thatcher, it's a bit trickier for a Labour MP to walk through the front door, shall we say. But, in private on certain issues where there is overlap, those conversations are still had. So more about, influencing policymakers in the long term. And I think what's important is, in quite a lot of examples where, any of us around the table or think tanks who aren't here will say, we are able to claim credit for that policy win. It's almost never just one of us that's having that conversation. I think where actually we are advocating for the same broad thing, like full expensing is also a really good example, right? I think the first time the CPS had spoken about full expensing was back in the 80s. I think for you guys it was probably the 70s, and it's banging that drum from different perspectives over a really long period of time, unfortunately. It'd be nice if it was a bit quicker. Yeah. But a lot of the time it is a really slow and steady drip that eventually erodes away any objections to a policy that you had. It's very rare that something comes out of nowhere, it really catches the imagination, and then change happens. That happens
Unless
a lot more now.
Unless it's something terrible, like banning cigarettes on age-related basis is all.
Yeah,
whatever.
or a really good example that came from outside of think tanks is the XL Bully ban and what Lawrence Newport did, and how that sort of fed into how looking for growth now works. That's a fantastic example of it happening in a different way. Historically, throughout the work that all of our think tanks have done, it has been more of a slow burn, I suppose.
Yeah. Now, William, you're really into activating the public, aren't you, to Harry's point?
Yeah,
I think you should speak about your Birmingham binge strike campaign. That was absolutely fantastic.
Yes, that was a fun day. So we at the TPA had not been up to Birmingham during the binge strike, and I remember talking about it in the office one day, and I thought, I'll go have a think about what we might do and when the next sort of big anniversary or the big milestone is. So I went outside for a vape, not a cigarette, because I stopped doing that a long time ago. Very sad. They've taxed me out of it. And I had a look at my phone. When's the next big anniversary? The 100th day of the Birmingham bin strikes was the next day, and I thought, oh, right. And I ran back to the office, and I was like, I need to get to Birmingham immediately. So me and one of our team went up, and I essentially just swanned around Birmingham all day in the stink and the filth, just doing a video explaining basically how the Birmingham bin strike happened, because it's not as simple as just the council went bankrupt and couldn't afford services. It's to do with a glitch inside of the Equality Act regarding equal pay, which the Supreme Court upheld, which meant that basically loads of equal pay claims were put towards the council, and it's ended up bankrupting the council, meaning that actually bin men actually got a pay cut. And for the first time in a while, I'm actually not going to complain about a trade union, because if their pay was cut quite severely, actually, so I understand why they were striking. But that's just one little example. That was more sort of a digital-focused one. I think also when it comes to sort of general campaigning, we do a lot of local stuff. So our big one at the TPA over the last year has been the full-day work week. So when the Conservatives were in power, actually, we were cited by the minister who was in charge of that area in the I think it was Department for Levelling Up at the time, as we were credited as being one of the main reasons they actually put a statutory obligation saying, look, no, councils aren't allowed to do this, which was great. Not to say South Cambridgeshire District Council listened, because they never do, either to the residents or to us or to the government. And when you've cut through when The Guardian blames you for the reason that it's a 4-day work week. But we were back there again last year, getting people to use one of our tools to write to their local consultation and then write to the local councillors. And we had almost 300, 400, 500 odd submissions to that, just from local people knocking on doors, delivering leaflets, things like that. And then during the final debate in the council chamber, we were cited about 4 or 5 times by Liberal Democrats sneering at us for being evil, dark money, Westminster think tank boys.
They would prefer that the bins didn't get collected.
Yeah, quite indeed. So we do a lot of local grassroots activism, which I think is sort of a USP for the TPA. But like I said, we also do things through the media and cause up a bit of a stink there, and attempt to achieve policy wins that way. But of course, like Emma said earlier, when the Labour government's in power, they're not particularly interested in what we have to say for obvious reasons. Yeah. But we can still kick up a stink.
Well, we'll come back to governments in a minute. But Maxwell.
I mean, for us, it's yes, we do a lot of outside the box thinking, but what we found useful is, I used to see this when I was kind of consultant. I was a lobbyist for a while, and people go and meet MPs or ministers, and they'd go and complain about something, and then you speak to the MP or the minister afterwards, and they go, "Well, that was useful, and now I know what the problem is. I don't know what the solution is." So what we do is solution engineering, and some things we found really useful actually is actually drafting some of the legislation, statutory instruments, whatever else, so that when we go and meet with MPs, policymakers, we can go, well, here's the problem, and also here's the solution, and we can just kind of pass that over to them. It just makes their life much easier. So we tend to do that. We also try and show, what a lot of the policies we produce, what that looks like on Treasury accounting books, fundamentally, because we always have this, great policy idea. We take it, let's say, last government, you go to a minister, fantastic idea, really like this, really sits with our goal as a government. Then they go and see the Treasury and it's game over because no one scored it. So we've started scoring. We started doing that sort of more hardcore dynamic analysis when it comes to our Excel spreadsheets. And it goes much better. So we're seeing more success there, and that's really how we're trying to think about things. We get in the minds of the policymaker, and then we can essentially, make that influence much more effective. Fundamentally,
now I'm feeling my age sitting here. You guys are all a little bit younger than me. 14 years I was in Parliament. First thing I did when I got into politics, I got involved with the Centre for Social Justice, poverty fighting, but also all the other think tanks. I got involved with the TPA, the CPS, the SI, and the IEA. Who, by the way, have been on. I know think tank watchers have been worried that the IEA hasn't been on. The IEA
don't all fit
has
around
already
the
been
table.
on. And that was brilliant with Reen. Do watch it. But I got involved with all those think tanks because I thought this is where the ideas come from. This is how politicians are steered to do the right thing, because politicians can't do all the thinking, so they're going to rely on think tanks. I didn't see much evidence for 14 years that you guys were very successful in getting Conservative ministers to do classical liberal things. You churned out loads of great policies, but then we were insufficiently Conservative. What do you think happened?
Well, I think it's. I saw a former minister who I won't name at a meeting, and they started off the meeting quite obliquely, and they said, "Just want to start this by saying we're really sorry." because for the last 14
We
years,
apologise.
we either ignored you or even we were a bit mean about you when you were criticising us. And I thought, thank you for the apology, but 14 years a bit too late now. So I think a lot of what happened was kind of institutional capture. And I think the government wanted to really make themselves look nice. I think the nasty party idea with the Conservatives really cut through to a lot of the kind of comms and campaigning that I think the strategists in CCHQ and Number 10 were thinking. So a lot of influence the Resolution Foundation. We found that, quite stark. And there's a great graph which shows. And I know people at the Resolution Foundation, lovely people. They're very nice, but I disagree with a lot of what they do. But you saw the budget, for example. Resolution Foundation being cited constantly as a kind of marker of good policy.
Yeah.
And there's also, as I was saying, this kind of great graph that shows UK productivity kind of stopping growing the year the Resolution Foundation was founded. Interesting. So there's a lot of that, and you find this with a lot of other pressure groups. They really drill in to certain policymakers and just keep on hammering them. Whereas for us, I don't think we have the resources to do that sort of stuff on every single policy detail. So it's a bit frustrating with that.
Any other criticisms of the centre-right? Why the centre-right? Because what I'm really concerned about is we get to the next election, and whether it's a Reform-led or a Conservative-led government, it's got to start doing the right thing. So I'm thinking, what really are we saying to the Conservatives and to Reform about the value of the think tanks and why they should pay attention?
Because ultimately, I think we'd all largely agree, is the Conservatives showed that 14 years of a right-wing government doesn't mean you're going to get right-wing things.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So what do you want to see them do differently at the next election, after the next election?
Well, I have to first say I completely agree with Marlow on all of the points he's made. I mean, the TPA has had wins over the last 14 years, but they're often quite small things. And often, even though maybe we've campaigned on them, unlike, say, the 4-day work week, where we were cited as an influence, other things where you say if there's an inheritance tax threshold change or a stamp duty change or things like that, they are TPA wins, but we perhaps didn't directly influence that. And that's fine. We recognise, we have to play the game and we can have to take what we get. I think there is a slight difference, though, in the way I think we approach our strategy at the moment in terms of the centre-right, but also for the Taxpayers Alliance personally. I think when Labour came into power, we recognised that we were virtually going to get nothing off them. Because also, if you consider what our three areas are, slower, simpler taxes, more efficient and less government spending, and more transparency. Which one of those things do you think Keir Starmer gives a damn about? Yeah, exactly, none of them. And whenever I remember when Starmer himself said, he was going to do this bonfire of the quangos, and a few people did kind of get a bit excited, but us at the TPA, we went, we don't believe you, mate. And as we've seen with the failure to really abolish NHS England, the ability to, abolish other quangos and other parts of the administrative state, he's not done any of that and has essentially actually allowed the quangocracy to grow. I mean, he set off like 25, 26, 27 new quangos.
I would love for him to name any of them.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember your research, the TPA research, was it 450?
438 quangos exist in the United Kingdom currently, and they are about a third of overall government spending. Yeah, I'm really online today. I'm really on tune. But I think that, to go back to my point earlier, I think that the centre-right and think tanks more broadly do need to switch slightly from a sort of influencing policymakers' decision to getting the people angry, to get them more, to actually respond to the politicians. Because politicians care about, as I said, incentives. And they care about getting elected a lot of the time. If you knock on a door and someone opens the door to you and says, why have you spent money on this? Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? I saw this. They might have a little bit of a reaction to that. So my view is ultimately to get the public to be more aware of how the government uses their money, often badly. And we do that via the traditional media and through digital media, such as podcasts and the like, and make sure that politicians, when they knock on doors, are getting both barrels from their constituents about how much they're wasting their hard-earned taxpayer cash. And I think that's the way we go about it, rather than influencing policymakers who will go, oh, well, I live in an SW1 bubble. I'm not really sure. I've got incentives to be a higher and more ranking Secretary of State or Minister. I think you have to stoke some level of public frustration about it first.
Yeah.
So, Steve, as you might have noticed, I've been to the Fighting for a Free Future merchandise shop. I have brought a Taxation is Worse Than Theft t-shirt.
Absolutely right that you should have done that, Harry.
And you have a Taxation is Worse Than Theft hat. Now, when we wanted to make Fighting for a Free Future merchandise, I said we should have a Taxation is Theft t-shirt. But you said, no, Harry. Taxation is worse than theft. Do you want to tell everyone why?
It's always got on my nerves that libertarians put out this bold statement that tax is theft. We are going to be stuck with tax. But this is a ha-ha only serious moment, as we say in software engineering, because on the one hand, we're joking and it's tongue-in-cheek and it's a bit satirical. But on the other hand, it's also true, because when you face the threat of theft, the government allows you to protect yourself against theft. Second, if you suffer a theft, Harry, of course, the government at least pretends to be on your side and that it will do something about it. And third, thieves don't steal from you all day, every time you earn money and every time you spend money. So look, if we're going to make this bold statement that tax is theft, let's be honest about it. Tax is actually worse than theft. If you agree with us, please buy the hat. They're great value, comfortable, fit well. And please buy the T-shirt, as Harry is expertly modelling, by going to shop.fightingforafreefuture.com. Thank you, Harry. Emma, let's get to the heart of the matter. Are the public finances sustainable, and what does that mean?
No. That was easy. What does it mean? Nothing good. I mean, this sort of boils down to the previous question as well. There is a lot of conversations that you occasionally have with politicians, and you go, here is the problem and here's how you need to fix it. And then the politician goes, I completely agree with you, but the public, I can't say that. Right? The public will not thank me for it. They will react quite badly, very badly, and so will the media, and the headlines won't be good, and then the response on the doorstep at the local elections or the next national elections mean I'll lose, and if I lose, then I can't keep doing the things that you want me to do. So I can't do the first one.
Which they're not doing anyway.
Right? So I can't do the first one because it will go down badly with the public, and we, I think, lack, and this is not sort of a centre-right or a left, I think it's across the political spectrum, we lack politicians who are willing to say unpopular things.
Yeah.
I've said some quite unpopular things, but then I love to say
we need to be honest with the public and say that in various different ways the public finances are unsustainable. You know, often we look at the affordability of public sector pensions, for example, on no metric is that sustainable beyond, well, it's not even sort of 10 or 20 years. It's a very close point at which that becomes unsustainable.
And that's the public sector pensions, but the state pensions in a bad way too, right?
Right. And then you have, if you look at the trajectory for where we think welfare claimants are going to go, where we think the cost of an ageing society is going to go, which is pensions, but it's also increased healthcare spending on older people. All of those things are going up, and the country is not growing in any way near enough. It's it's usually a significant factor below the rate at which those expenses are growing. So no, it's not sustainable. We need to make changes. That might be cuts in what the public, purse pays for, but politicians are not necessarily brave for understandable reasons, right? I'm not suggesting more politicians need to stand up and say completely suicidal things.
I mean, I said the triple lock had to go. It was reported on the front page of the Telegraph, and people sort of went, "Oh, he's actually said it," and then moved on.
Yes, indeed. And the number of politicians who will say that privately on, say, the triple lock.
Yeah, they need to get on with it.
They won't say it publicly.
It's the exact same with the NHS. Like when I was in Parliament working for Steve, the number of politicians I would privately speak to, and they would say, "Oh, yeah, obviously we have to privatise the NHS or move to some kind of European system." But of course, I can't say that publicly. That would be suicide. Yeah. And it's one of the major issues that we've had, years and years and decades of the public, of politicians not being honest with the public, and therefore the public have incredibly unreasonable demands of politicians. Yes. But to wrap this all a little bit together, I think on the kind of how unsustainable the public finances are, we should be very clear that we are trying to save people's benefits, save what they receive, save their livelihoods, because there's two ways this goes. We either reform our current system or the entire system collapses. And those are basically the only two options in front of us.
I mean, that's definitely the way that Harry and I see it. I mean, do the think tanks look at the public finances and think that there is a limited amount of time until this leads to a massive crisis?
Oh, totally. I mean, just on a couple of other points, actually, so we've talked about the state pension, we talked about public sector pensions. There's also student debt, which is really rearing its head at the moment. I checked my letter the other day from Student Finance England. I took a cold shower after. It's not good. But it's wild. I pay a lot in student finance, and yet the number keeps going up. And I had a meeting about this.
Well, the debt that you personally owe keeps going.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the thing. It's not really debt. It's just a phantom number. It just goes up and up and up. You do any sort of analysis about this, by 2040, the number on the government's books is going to be £500 billion. That's not being reported, is it? That's very bad news. Meanwhile, graduates are paying a lot of tax to try and keep this down. So you go and have meetings with politicians, MPs about this, and they go, yeah, you see, but that's not for another couple of parliaments. I may not even have my seat. So why bother with this now? And it's like, yes, but you're still probably going to be living in this country, and I'm still going to be living here probably as well. What's the contingency plan, guys? Talking about things in terms of time bombs is quite useful, because you can point to most areas of public finances. You can look at the PSNUFL, the Public Sector Net Financial Liabilities spreadsheet, comes out of the ONS and the Treasury every now and again, and you just go, my God, this is absolutely
and no
terrifying.
one seems to care.
No.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'll be really clear, this is why we work with Glint, because I think the history of the last 50 years is it always ends up in inflation. Taxes go up, they're now at the highest they've been since forever. We end up with loads of debt, and then it goes into credit expansion and QE, and that's so we get inflation. So I think we're going to get massive inflation, and that's why I support and promote Glint, because it gives people an opportunity.
And how was gold doing yesterday?
Well,
I mean, if you check the market,
absolutely.
I will say at the ASI, one of our we every year we take on 2 gap year kids. So before they go to university, if they want to take a gap year, instead of going to Cambodia or you're traveling around Europe, whatever else, we take 2 really, really smart, clever kids out of just before they go to university. And one of them, great guy called James Hodgkinson, who we absolutely adore at the ASI, is brilliant, has a lot of gold sovereigns, because he's with you on this, Steve. He knows.
Bitcoin and gold is...
Bitcoin and what? Gold.
People are waking up
but
to it.
he's having a great time, because he goes and buries his gold sovereigns, because they're capital gains exempt. He goes and buries them in his garden. He's waiting for the rainy day when eventually gold really does crack through that ceiling, and it's obviously at a $5,000 all-time high.
Well, it keeps it keeps accelerating, and it's actually genuinely worrying to me, because I've spent, I don't know, over 15 years now saying that this is what would happen. And now I'm looking at the gold price accelerating away and thinking, I'm not going to use the word that actually goes through my, but oh dear, oh dear me, oh no, it looks like fiat money's collapsing in value.
But I think one of the really interesting things is on gold, because obviously we were speaking about house building earlier, and all of your institutions, maybe a bit less the TPA, but in general, do focus on it, is if you measure house prices in gold, they are roughly the same as they were 70 years ago.
Yeah, in the 50s,
Yeah, roughly the same. Obviously, if you measure it in fiat currency, absolutely shoots up. But it's one of the really interesting things is just the way in which so many of our issues often do come back to the monetary system.
Yeah. Right, now then, which policies most matter to you, to your think tanks? I know you do a lot of work, yes, in my backyard.
Yes, well, I mean, so for full disclosure, I'm only a contractor to the ASI. I'm head of public affairs, but so 1 day a week. But the other 4 days, I co-founded my own company with a guy called Adam Allnut. So it's called the YIMBY Initiative, and it's a private sector company. So we're quite happy to make a profit. But what we do is we write policy papers for clients who are facing planning problems, and then we just suggest a way. So building safety regulator is a big one. So that needs to be completely pared back. Absolutely. So too does changes to permissive development rights.
So let's just pick up on that, because this is a really important point. In the wake of the absolute disaster of Grenfell, a lot of people might watch this and think, "Oh my God, he wants to pare back on building safety." So just be really specific. What has gone wrong with building regulation? Because we all want to live in safe homes, especially safe high-rise. So you're in favour of safe buildings, but what's gone wrong with the regulator? The
reason why I'm so against the regulator is because I also want to live in a safe high-rise. The problem is that the way in which the regulator acts, and I've spent a lot of time looking at regulators. This is the worst behaved regulator I've ever come across. Yeah. Full stop. I mean, so the reason I say I want to live in a safe high-rises, so I oppose the regulator, is because it's stopping the building of new safe high-rises. Fundamentally, that's the thing. And the incentive system, how it functions, and you just have to tick hundreds of thousands of boxes, and then then they say, "Yep, that building's safe." There's no innovation incentive there for developers and architects to engineer safer buildings. Yeah. You just pass the very, very high metric, and then you stop and you just go, why would I bother wasting more resources making it even safer if the regulations aren't even going to follow up?
So for you, it's about housing. The most important policy is housing. Absolutely. It's getting people into homes. It's family formation. All those things. And
it's making sure you can live somewhere near to a job which is economically, productive. So for example, we've got loads of young adults, NEETs, who are living with their parents at the moment up in up and down all across the country. apart from kind of in central London where all the high-paying jobs are. If we're not building in London, guess what? Those guys have to stay in their basements in their mum and dad's spare room because they just can't afford to move down. So it's a lose-lose for everyone.
Emma, what would you say, and what would the CPS say, are the most important areas of policy for change?
I mean, I definitely also say housing. I think we're in complete agreement on this and campaign on many of the same areas. I think broadly, it's not a specific policy area, but the lack of growth is really just underlying everything. And partly that is, housing, and a lack of housing contributes to a lack of growth. But, we're talking about the sustainability of the public finances. If this country does not grow, everything else is screwed. It doesn't matter if you're talking housing, healthcare, education, like nothing works if there isn't growth. And I wrote an article earlier this week because Steve Reed, the housing secretary, had put out a video and it was POV, you're looking for good news in the papers. And he was flicking through the papers going, why are there no good news stories? Look, there's a fantastic story. The IMF has uprated the UK's growth. It's buried on page 42. Well, they'd upgraded it from 1.3 to 1.4. Which is not enough. That's basically a rounding error. And 1.3 or 1.4 is probably about half what is actually needed. And that's needed, every year for the next 50 years.
In order to meet our obligations.
In order to meet just where we currently are now, not the sort of projected spend that is coming down the line in many areas, as we've said, pensions, healthcare, that kind of stuff. So all of the different ways in which this country needs growth is really what drives the CPS.
William, what's the top thing?
I'm not going to say housing, I'm afraid. Sorry. Although I will just quickly point on, Marlow's completely spot on about the building safety regulator. Although one thing I will say about it, it's an example of a quango that actually does what it was set up to do, which is actually just block house building, essentially, and make everything worse for people, many such cases. You might expect I say tax, but I'm actually not going to say tax, mainly because I think the spending issue is so out of control. I think before we address anything else, we have to address what the government spends. I mean, we're spending over about 1.2, 1.3 trillion pounds a year. And within that, the majority of it is on healthcare and on welfare. I mean, and also debt interest, which is over £100 billion a year.
It's our fourth highest government spending is on debt interest.
It is. And that is nauseating. And that's because of reckless policies by this government and the last Conservative government, addicted to borrowing at cheap interest rates without the realisation that you're going to have to pay for it back in the end anyway. So I think that as a sort of Javier Milei style fan, I think you need to take a chainsaw to the entire damn system. I think you need to be not just brutally honest with the British public, but just as you've said many times before, Steve, we can either go bankrupt or we can save the country from bankruptcy. Which one do you want? And you just bring that to them. And yet they're going to have to do some things they won't like, such as welfare reform, such as saying, okay, I know you have anxiety, I know you have depression, and we're not trying to take away from those as issues, but I'm afraid you're not getting the enhanced rate of PIP in a mobility car for it. Sorry, not happening. Or, for example, when it comes to even just spending aside the civil service and the administrative state, I'm sorry, a lot of these public sector bodies that receive taxpayers' cash or entirely funded by taxpayers' cash, sorry, what's your function? Yeah, sorry, you have to go. Bye-bye, here's your box, go home. I think you need to be relatively brutal with it, and same with pensions as well. It's like, I'm sorry, we cannot afford the triple lock on pension. It's £15 billion a year. We're just keeping to maintain it. Sorry, that has to be means tested, and you just have to be brutally honest with these people and say, okay, if you want some growth, if you want some tax cuts, if you want reform in other areas, you're going to have to understand that the state is living beyond its means, and also it's actually driving more and more people away because we're having to tax even more out of people in order to fund the things we can't afford in the first place.
And I think that's the key point that people don't understand. They hear you calling for quite brutal measures, but the reason is to avoid the brutal consequences which will follow in a crisis.
Which I'm terrified of, by the way, as a young person, because I have to live in this country, as do we all. That's not a dig at you, Steve, of course. But you have to live but you've got kids, and you've possibly got grandkids. You care about their futures. You don't want them to live in a country which is completely bankrupt and then think, oh, what's the point of staying here? Let us go to another country.
Well, this is the thing about just specifically on the triple lock. If pensioners want to keep getting their state pension, we need to abolish the triple lock. Yeah. It's as simple as that. Otherwise, they will no longer get their state pension. And it's a lot of like this on a lot of issues. If we want to pay benefits to people who actually need them, we need to cut them away from people who don't.
Can I also just present a tactical point as well of how to perhaps sell this? So I wrote an article in The Critic a little while back just called The Social Contract is Broken. I think I did it after the budget. Because there is quite a lot of concern and anger out there regarding public spending. And I've seen this from my own family as well. But actually, it's not towards some of the big things that we MAPS want to do with. It's to do with illegal migration. It's to do with like the minor bits of welfare spending, like I mentioned. It's to do with civil service pay, the administrative state, all that kind of stuff. My view is actually you kind of actually need to do all those things first, actually. So then when I remember there was a discussion on LBC where I can't remember who it was who was interviewing, but he had all the correct stats on the triple lock. He had all the correct stats on pension numbers, but the caller just wasn't having any of it. Just wasn't listening. Oh, well, how much do we spend on foreign aid? How much do we spend on this? And actually, I do agree with the lady to some extent that we shouldn't be spending that money in the first place. That it's a travesty that we're spending upwards of £14 billion on foreign aid, which doesn't actually seem to solve anything in the long term. But actually what you need to do is you need to abolish those bits of public spending which people get really aggy and angsty about. And then when you abolish them, you say, well, look, we've still got a budget deficit. We still have a massive national debt. It's clear we need to go further on the things that you don't like because then they have almost no cover. Now, that's a bit revealing my cards kind of thing. But, I'm about honesty, Steve, and telling the truth. And if people don't like that, well, sue me.
Yeah, well, indeed, that has definitely always been my approach. But I think we're really clear around this table that either we'll have a government that does the things which the centre-right think tanks have been long proposing, or we will have a hideous fiscal crisis in which undefined horrors will take place because we will just have run out of money as a government, won't be able to raise it in the bond markets. Does any political party look like it is remotely capable of implementing a programme that we might approve of, which will save the day?
I think it's too early.
Yeah,
too early to say. Yeah, we haven't. I mean,
Not right now.
Not right now. No. So Tories obviously still doing their policy process, so reform, and they all need help. I think from anyone who can chip in. To be honest, that's it.
Yeah.
We all agree with that.
We'll agree now.
No, I do agree with Marlow on one sense, but one thing I would like to see is a little bit more energy, and also just even if it's just signalling, like a signal of intent. It's like, oh, we're going to look at this. And to be fair, Reform have done a few things on that. I remember when Richard Tice was on, I think, Radio 4, and he was asked, would you consider looking at the triple lock on pension? He goes, everything's on the table.
Yeah.
When's the last time a Tory politician said that? Now, of course, I don't necessarily believe it. I have my concerns with both the Tories and Reform. And I have to say, to some extent, I was quite impressed with the £47 billion cuts that Mel Stride proposed at Tory party conference. I was impressed with that. I came away feeling quite happy about that. But again, it's not quite enough, and especially when they're not addressing things like the triple lock, I think, are you being really serious about the state of the public finances?
So now this is a very interesting point, because we've mostly talked about financial and economic matters, but Harry, there's something else going on, isn't there?
Well, I think we've seen, particularly over the past 5 years, a real realignment of voters, and a real big realignment of not only do who voters or who the people vote for, but also which groups support each other. And it does feel like at the moment this kind of low spending or fiscally conservative and socially liberal quadrant is just totally empty. It really does feel like that. Yeah. So what do you guys think about the kind of realignment of voters that we've had over the past 5 years, and particularly comparing it to, let's say, the alignment of voters that the Cameron coalition was propped up by versus what a government or a future government would need to have now?
I think I don't want to say it's also too early to say, but I think it is too early because these realignments take a long time to shake out and settle down, and then there will be a period, maybe a decade, maybe a couple of decades, where things settle again, and then there will be another realignment in some way, shape or form. So we had a post-war realignment, then things were, broadly post-war consensus. Margaret Thatcher changed a few things, then we had another 20, 30 years. We're in the middle of it. So I think in 15 years, we'll be able to look back and go, oh, these were the trends. And we have some idea of what those trends might be. It is less the kind of left, right, and now, your income, whether or not you went to university, is much more of a determining factor on how you'll vote than it was, say, 10, 15 years ago. But I think the idea that we can say something today about the realignment that will be true in 12, 18, 24 months' time is just not true, because it's still happening and happening quite quickly, I think. Yeah,
I suppose when I look at particularly the alignment towards the great surge to reform, that seems to be about community and about nation rather than about economics. And I'm looking at it, and particularly when you say about 10 or 20 years, I'm thinking, have we got 10 or 20 years to head off this fiscal crisis? I don't think we have we?
No, potentially not.
I think it's all economics, though. Maybe I'm just economics brained about it. But this is the issue, I think, which is that because we've seen no growth, high taxes, whatever else, that drives people to anger.
Yeah, I do. And
then they retrench in its
exactly,
nation.
Yeah.
I do think the best way the government could take illegal immigration, for example, off of people's minds would be to put more money back in their pockets. I genuinely think that a lot of issues And the reason they're so high up people's priorities is simply because the cost of living is so high. Their payment packets are getting lower and lower every single year. And, I think a lot of it does just come back to basic economics.
So if I can just, I agree with one point. I'm going to disagree with another point. First of all, I agree with you in the sense that people are seeing their cost of living crisis intensify while people are put them in hotels and have, I think it was a Croydon council who gave them PlayStations and so on and so forth. And there's a level of unfairness to it. Also the fact that they've come in illegally while other people have come in legally, or they've lived there all their life. There's a level of unfairness to it. Actually, I think the best way to take it off people's minds is by solving it, personally. And then we can get to some of the bigger issues about public finances and things like that. And I think when you look at polling, and I know polling's it's not a perfect science, but it is one of the few we've got to understanding public opinion. Economy and immigration are top two. They're almost like next to each other. So if you're a party that's focusing on growth, whether that's by building houses or doing tax cuts or getting rid of regulatory bodies or regulations more broadly, and also you're being serious on the impacts of most mass legal and illegal migration on not just the public finances, but not just the public finances, but also the people's lives. I think that could be a winning strategy.
So, last word to each of you. What one thing would you implore this government, the next government, to do? What one thing would you have them do? Maxwell.
Dynamically score their policies and properly.
So that if they, for example, wanted a cut in corporation tax, they would see that it would actually raise more later.
Exactly.
Emma, what would you have?
I think if it's this government, be bolder on housing. They've talked about it, they've said the right things, but what they've done has not matched the rhetoric.
William?
This government resign. And the next government, you need to deal with administrative state, because it's all very good and well having a bunch of policies, but if you don't know which levers to pull and can't implement any of them, there's virtually no point in having them.
Harry, what do you want?
I want to slash the state. I want to go Javier Milei with a chainsaw and abolish half of government departments.
You heard it here first.
Let's go.
You heard it here first. We've been asking who will be the UK's Javier Milei, and the answer is Harry Ridger. So you've learned it here first. This has been The Insurgency with me, Steve Baker. I'm extremely grateful to the Taxpayers Alliance, to William, extremely grateful to the CPS and Emma. Thank you very much for coming. And very, very grateful to Maxwell. Thank you to the Adam Smith Institute, and good luck with Yimby, and good luck with this very interesting book, which I will be getting a hold of. This podcast was brought to you by GlimpPay, the app which allows you to own, to save, to send, and to spend real physical gold anywhere that, more or less anywhere, that MasterCard is accepted. So please do have a look at the website and get started. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you've enjoyed this podcast, don't just look at our podcast channel. Don't just like it and share it and subscribe, but also go to the websites and the podcasts and the blogs and the social media of the Taxpayers Alliance, the Centre for Policy Studies, and the Adam Smith Institute, because they're putting out great content which delves deep behind the gossip of Westminster to the things we really need to do. So once again, thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.